Hey, welcome to the video. Today we're going to be comparing two ultra affordable 35mm autofocusing lenses for Fujifilm X mount. I've got the Viltrox 35mm f1.7 and the TTArtisan 35mm f1.8 version 2. Both of these lenses are available for X mount, E mount, and Z mount, but we're going to be taking a look at them on the X mount. These lenses were sent to me. Viltrox sent me their 35 and TTArtisan sent me their 35. I'm not being paid for this other than the lenses themselves, and so all opinions and whatever is my own. So we're going to be comparing these lenses in a variety of different sort of categories, so check the chapter markers if you want to skip around to something that is particularly relevant to you. I'm mostly comparing them in terms of photography. Just did a lot more sort of photo samples than I did video samples, but I will show you an autofocus comparison between the lenses for video or using video. And I'll probably swap the lenses onto that camera, so that way you'll have just another sort of point of comparison between the two lenses as we go through the video. So what does ultra budget or affordable autofocusing lenses mean? So for the Viltrox f1.7, the retail price is $179 US, and for the TTArtisan, it is $125 US. So let's dive in a little bit into the specs. I'm just kind of gloss through those real quick and then talk about like what you get and the build quality of each lens. While I do that, I'm gonna swap the lenses onto the camera. So let's start with the Viltrox f1.7 Air, and then I'll put the TTArtisan on that camera there. $179, it weighs about 170 grams. It is a 53mm equivalent. It has an STM focusing motor, so it's like a stepping motor. It's got ED and nano coatings on the elements for sharpness and to help with flaring. It has 9 aperture blades. It has a 0.13 times magnification. But what that means in terms of close focus, it can focus to 0.33 meters or about 1.1 feet. It's got a 52mm front filter diameter. I think it has 11 elements. I'm not sure how many groups. I didn't see that on the specs page. I just counted the number of elements that they showed in this picture, and I think it was 11. The widest aperture is f1.7, and the smallest aperture available is f16. In terms of build quality, so it's interesting that Viltrox, they called these lenses, these little autofocusing lenses, their Air series, and they, regardless of the focal length and regardless of the mount, they all look exactly the same. So these are not the same lens. So that's kind of cool. I mean, it's interesting that Viltrox is sort of going this route. This is a 40mm for full frame, Sony E mount, f2.5. This is the 35 f1.7 for X mount, and this is the 56 f1.7 for X mount. And again, they're all the same size. And they were also sharing the same hood. So this hood here is kind of like a wide angle hood that was on the 40mm, also came with the 56mm, which is weird. It definitely should have had a deeper hood for that. But the 35mm did come with a deeper hood, finally. So that's good. So they are differentiating it finally a little bit with some of the accessories. They all come with a little bag, which is nice. Let's put those back. They are plasticky in their builds, but they don't feel, cheap in any way. I don't think. I think they feel nice. There's a lot of lenses these days that are made out of plastic from, big manufacturers that cost a lot of money. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that it's made out of plastic. It saves money, it makes it lighter, and it seems to be very durable. I mean, I haven't had any of these lenses for, more than a year at this point, so I can't say exactly how durable they're gonna be, but it doesn't seem like cheap. And of course it's got a metal mount. It has a USB-C port here on the bottom for updating firmware. I did a lot of the photo samples, etc. with the Fujifilm X-M5. It seemed like a good pairing with these lenses. Very affordable camera, small body, etc., and very affordable small lenses. So just to give you a little frame of reference for what it looks like on this little camera, there is the Viltrox f1.7. The Viltrox doesn't have any, buttons or switches or anything like that on it. It just has the manual focus ring. Very stripped down and simple lens. All right, so let's take a look at the TTArtisan. I'll switch on the Viltrox to the camera now. All right, so take a look at the TTArtisan 35 f1.8 Mark II. Again, this one retails for $125 USD. It's got 10 elements and 7 groups. It has a 0.4 meter or 1.31 foot minimum focusing distance with a 52mm front filter diameter. It weighs 176 grams, so 6 grams heavier than the Viltrox. It has 9 aperture blades. The widest aperture is f1.8 and the smallest aperture available is f16. You can see, of course, it has a metal mount, the contacts here for transmitting data to the camera, etc. The build on this one, this is some kind of metal, probably aluminum, as opposed to the plastic of the Viltrox. The inner sort of barrel part here, or the inner part of the lens, is plastic. Again, no features or buttons or switches on this lens, just a focus ring, similar size to the Viltrox. Again, with the XM5, you can see how that fits on there. To update the firmware on the TTArtisan, you actually use the rear cap. So on the rear cap, it's got some contact points here that interface with the lens itself, and then it has a USB-C port on the cap. TTArtisan only works with Windows to update the firmware. And I did need to update the firmware on this lens to get it to autofocus better, especially in video. So if you are a Mac user, I guess TTArtisan figures that, you know, most Mac users won't be of the ultra low budget persuasion or something. You're kind of out of luck. So you'll have to have access to a Windows PC or just not buy this lens. Again, I did need to update the lens to improve the autofocus performance. So I'm not sure if I got an early version that didn't have like the latest firmware on it, or if they're shipping it out with that old firmware, which would be unfortunate. So keep that in mind. I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. It has this hood here, which seems more like a wide angle lens hood. I don't know, it's sort of a mix. It didn't come with a bag or any other accessory, just the hood and the 2 caps. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the image quality comparisons I did between the 2 lenses. Again, check the chapter markers if there's things that you want to jump around to, and we'll come back and wrap it up after that. So let's start with the sharpness. And one interesting thing I found, and I don't know why I didn't do this on both lenses, but this is the Viltrox, and this is at 1.7. You can see up here on the right. And I actually set the focusing point to the corner. So you can see that it's pretty sharp here where it says Ultra HD, etc. But that made it super blurry in the center. And it's a little bit sharper down here. So that's focusing on the corner, and then this is what the center of the image looks like. And then on this one, I obviously did the opposite. So I'm focusing here in the middle, and we have a nice sharp, you know, text on the book. And then, of course, the corner here is pretty blurry. It's weird, like, so this corner is blurry, but this corner is sharp. So there's like a, I don't know, like a astigmatism or something going on with this lens. All right, so now to do the comparison view, the TTArtisan is set to 1.8 and the Viltrox is set to 1.7. Comparing the center, I would say, you know, the Viltrox looks definitely sharper. Up here, same thing, a little sharper, a little less, you know, a little blurrier, a little ghosty, or, you know, whatever. This lens just seems to have like I said, an astigmatism. So it's blurry, but then sharper here. But it's all consistently blurrier over here on the TTArtisan. Another thing I wanted to point out is the distortion of the TTArtisan. You can see how this, you know, the binding or the straight line of this book, you know, definitely falls off to the corner where it's much straighter over here. So as far as I can tell, the only thing that profile corrections do on the TTArtisan is help with the vignette. Enable the profile corrections, the corners brighten up. So it's pretty significant vignette on the TTArtisan. And then the same thing happens over here on the Viltrox. So you have significant vignetting, and then if you enable the profile corrections, it definitely brightens up. So here we are, f2.8 on both lenses. Zooming in. Viltrox on the right, TT on the left, same thing. It's sharper on the Viltrox in the center. And both are still pretty blurry. Not a whole lot of difference from wide open to 2.8. Another thing you might notice is that the field of view on the Viltrox is slightly wider. So if you look here, you can see we got more of the Mulholland showing versus over here. And then down on this corner, you know, the Dostoevsky name, you know, cuts off at the K, whereas we're getting a little bit of the Y on the Viltrox. So slightly wider field of view, which is also just something to point out. Let's jump to, what is this? F4, let's just jump to 5.6. I don't want to go through all these. Okay, so here we are at 5.6. And I have switched them because I just find this comparison viewer to be very hard to use. So the left side is the Viltrox and the right side is the TTArtisan. They start to even out much more. Sharpness is very similar, corner to corner, center frame. It all starts to look very similar. This corner that is like noticeably falling off does have a little bit of blur to it, whereas the Viltrox doesn't. And you can see a little chromatic aberration, etc. So I'd say overall, in general, the Viltrox is just cleaner lens than the TTArtisan, regardless of the aperture. Going back to the specs I already mentioned, the Viltrox focuses much closer than the TTArtisan. And I also found that wide open, the TTArtisan also has a pretty soft, close focus. So you have to stop the lens down a little bit in order to sharpen up the close focusing. So in this example of these berries, this is wide open at f1.8, and you can see, the fringing and the blurriness that you're getting around the edges versus this shot here, which I believe was at f4. You can see the difference between the Viltrox and the TTArtisan in terms of the sharpness at the closest focusing distance. Both will exhibit some chromatic aberration, both longitudinally and just, normal chromatic aberration, but it's nothing that I didn't find it any, egregious or out of the ordinary. The TTArtisan, you can see if you just kind of zoom in, pixel peeping on these branches, you can see some fringing going on, but nothing that I would consider like terrible by any stretch. And with the Viltrox, you're going to find much the same. I'm zoomed in 244%. You can see the 5.6 here is, got a green fringe on it, but again, nothing crazy. Here's a good example of the longitudinal chromatic aberration that you can see on the Viltrox. So the Fujifilm, right here in the center, there's really not any aberration happening, but if you go to the left, you can start to see some of the magenta fringe, and then going to the right, you can see some of the green fringing. I already talked about distortion a little bit, so I don't want to beat a dead horse too much. Incidentally, this is with the Viltrox this is a HEIF straight out of camera, so this has got some corrections applied to it, I would imagine, in the camera, and it's really straight, really sharp. So this is a raw photo. This is the Viltrox, and I use this one because the edge of the desk and the mouse pad or the desk mat, you can see is pretty straight. There's a little bit of bowing, as you can see on the left side, just kind of tapering off noticeably. And then here, that desk is much more curved on the TTArtisan. I didn't do a lot of flare tests, but here is the TTArtisan. You can see on the left side, it's kind of picking up the edge of the lens. The lens elements, you're starting to see that creeping in, and you don't see it on the Viltrox. On both, you're getting a little bit of blooming going on, but not too bad. Here is the TTArtisan, and focusing here on the foreground, you can see a really strong flaring going on, caused by the sun. So you have that vertical purple streak, and then some ghosting going on at the bottom of the image. Focusing on the background, the flaring is much reduced. You do get a little bit of that purple, but it's not anywhere near as bad as it was when it was focused more on the foreground. For the Viltrox, I don't think I focused on the foreground, unfortunately, but I think it's much less flare prone in general than the TTArtisan. I did do a couple of just extra, flare. I had the Viltrox for longer than the TTArtisan, so I have a lot more example photos of it. I had to update the autofocus of the TTArtisan. You can see what it was doing on its original firmware. Even with the new firmware, it's not a good focuser for video. It has, very abrupt transitions if you need to rack focus in a shot. I just don't think it's the right choice. I think it works fine for photography. It's just very abrupt and very noticeable, and you can see it has noticeable focus breathing. So that just sort of highlights the abruptness of the shifts in focus that the TTArtisan is doing. The Viltrox is noticeably better. It has much smoother transitions than the TTArtisan, and it has pretty much no focus breathing. You can just see the edge where that light stand is in the frame. As it goes to close focus and farther focus, it just doesn't really move or shift. And you can see the lampshade in the background. They all stay in the same position regardless of where the focus is. So much, much better focus for video. I think they make a lot of sense. They're affordable. The image quality is really good, especially on the Viltrox. The autofocus works really well on the Viltrox, not so well on the TTArtisan. So yeah, they're really great. I mean, I think the fact that we can get these autofocusing lenses for the price point is a win for everybody involved, I believe. So in terms of these two, the Viltrox wins hands down in just about every metric, except being a little bit more expensive. But like most lenses these days, once you stop them down a couple clicks out of the maximum or widest aperture, everything sort of evens out. They get sharp, vignetting improves, chromatic aberrations improve, and these lenses start to look, almost indistinguishable from each other. It's really at the wide open aperture that you see the most difference. This one has a little more character, meaning that it has sort of a softer, dreamier look, with some blooming, especially at close focusing distances when wide open. TTArtisan has like pretty pronounced flaring artifacts as well. So if you like those kinds of things, then the TTArtisan might be the lens for you. But in my opinion, I would say if you're getting an autofocus lens, maybe go for the Viltrox. And you could always buy like a really affordable manual focus lens, vintagey character. You could always get a lens like that if you just need it for those special use cases. Or you could just get a vintage lens, old lens, and just adapt it. So I think, overall, the Viltrox is just better. Sorry, TTArtisan, but that's just how I feel about it, and I think the images sort of back me up. So hopefully that helps you, and you got something out of that. Let me know in the comments if you have any interesting thoughts or pertinent questions. I will probably get back to you. I appreciate you watching the video, and maybe I'll see you in another one.